but we want to get a law enforcement perspective on this. So we're going to bring in Jamie Copenhaver, a former sheriff's detective and investigator. And Jamie, always good talking with you. We appreciate you joining us this morning.
Happy Saturday. Good to be with you, Garrett.
Yeah, happy Saturday. So we are talking protests again, not just here in Florida, but across the country, really. And so I'm curious from a law enforcement perspective, what all goes into preparations for large events like this in so many different cities.
Each city is going to be responsible, Garrett, for their own safety or protection as it pertains to law enforcement and first responders. We've had a couple of practice runs, right? This is the second or third march that we've had from this group. Mostly peaceful. We've not seen a lot of violence in any of these prior marches. So, it's a lot of communication between law enforcement and the organizers of these No Kings Day protests. And, you want to keep that protest in a cordon area in conjunction with law enforcement so everyone can be protected. So, as Matt has reported out there, there's not a large crowd, but there's a large crowd gathering. And as that day progresses out there, they're going to keep it contained within that certain area. Here's the good news, Garrett. The organizers of these marches are working with law enforcement because no one wants to get hurt. We don't want to have any incidents. So it just takes a lot of good communication and a lot of good planning, which we see that it's working.
Yeah, and this is a live look right now in Atlanta. In the aerial view there, you can see a large crowd out there. We also know that anytime you're talking about political topics like this, there are often groups of counter-protesters that show up. We heard in Sanford there were a couple of counter-protesters out there. But how do you make sure that tensions don't rise when you are talking big crowds out there and heated topics, things that can escalate?
Watch what salt does to blood pressure.
See this branch of arteries right here? The Mayo Clinic calls it the left anterior descending artery. I call it the widowmaker. It's where the majority of plaques form over the course of your life and where almost half of all heart attacks take place. But when you do this for 7 seconds, all those plaques flush out. I'm going to show you something about your blood pressure that might surprise you. Everyone knows your heart is made up of valves and
if we're not careful.
Well, first of all, everyone has a First Amendment right to go out and speak and yell and get a megaphone and honk horns and what have you, right? Until you don't. And what I mean by that, Garrett, if you have a counter-protester that comes up and that start engaging a tit for tat, if you will, and we've seen this play out on a number of different marches, what's going to happen is law enforcement's not going to go in and pluck them out right away. They're going to allow them to speak, but if it turns any shade of violence, they're going to pluck those bad actors out, whether it's protesters or counter-protesters, to extradite them out of that area so it doesn't incite more people to become agitators and violent, if you will. So, everyone has their First Amendment, but we have to do it under the guidelines and the rules, which, dictates you can go out and blow horns, use a megaphone, but you cannot, be putting hands on people, shoving and pushing, which we've seen in a few of these in the past. Not so much this group, but in other protests it turns violent.
Yeah, and is there a, when you are talking about something that is constitutionally protected, I would imagine that is something that can be a tough line to walk sometimes for law enforcement to make sure you're not violating someone's rights, but also at the same time making sure things don't get out of hand if there is some sort of confrontation. So how do you kind of walk that tightrope?
First of all, I want to give some credit to the organizers of these No Kings Day protests, Garrett. They're doing them early in the mid-afternoon, if you will, up until dark, and most of them are shutting down right at dark 30. So, we've seen these play out before in other protests and other groups where that extends into the nightfall. And, when it gets dark, the bad actors come out. So a lot of good communication there. In terms of protecting people's rights, it's exactly the way you explained it. You have the First Amendment right to go out and gather on a public street to protest until you don't. And what I mean by that is, we've seen in other protests, rocks, bricks, bottles, Molotov cocktails on the violent side of the same. And what law enforcement is doing today is keeping a fine-tuned comb, if you will, on all the protesters to make sure everyone's organized and committed to staying safe and not going the violent way. And, unfortunately, Garrett, the protesters out there are probably the best people you'll ever see, right? But unfortunately, you're going to have the agitators that come into town and they want to make a bigger voice. And those are the bad actors that we see getting plucked out of these large crowds, are often people that aren't even organized in the original protest.
I cannot believe you're getting all of this for the price. Right now, the Laura Geller makeup kit is including the award-winning beige powder foundation and the kabuki brush. I mean, this palette literally thought.
What is a law enforcement strategy in something like this? Do you think in some of these protests we see, yes, we often see a bit of a law enforcement presence, but that also could be something that you want to make sure is not too much of a presence, and at the same time, where we might see some undercover officers in the crowd as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you're going to have people that are engaged in an undercover capacity in all of these crowds to take the temperature, if you will. You want to hear the chatter. You want to know before these uniform officers know if something is about to go down that would turn violent. And then, of course, in terms of the show of force, you want uniformed officers out there with the uniform of the day that they normally wear. You don't want officers out in riot gears and helmets that we've seen in the past, because that draws attention to law enforcement. And those marches always will turn on the cops because of the way they're dressed. You don't want to overdress, but you want to show up with command presence, which we see quite often here in these protests locally. But you're going to have a ERT or emergency response team on standby, Garrett. Should this become unruly, they can call in backup. That's when you may see potentially guys in riot gear and helmets. But you're not going to see it on the street in Sanford today. They don't want to incite violence or incite problems.
You also talked about many of these protests being held during the day. How does that, in some ways, really just kind of lessen tension to begin with?
I mean, daylight is the best, right? I mean, whatever you can see in day. If you have a group of rowdy people that, let's say, that are not really part of the organization, that are coming there to cause problems, you're going to be able to spot those folks in the daytime, more so at night. But here's the other thing too: alcohol always comes into play on these protests. People get alcoholed up at home, if they will. They'll see this play out on the TV, and they're like, I want to go voice my opinion. Well, they go down there. A lot of these guys will go up intoxicated, and they start really inciting the crowd. You're going to have pro and counter pro protesters out there. You don't want to see that, right? You want to keep the bad actors out of town, for the lack of better words. And I think the way they're doing these in the broad daylight is certainly better. It's safer. I would suspect they would have to have a permit for this large of a gathering. So once again, the city or the county is going to be into that planning. Also, the law enforcement leaders are going to be involved in that planning to direct these people to shut it down at dark, if you will.
And, what all goes into, you talk about the permitting and that kind of thing as well. That it probably just is so that law enforcement and others can help know a little bit more of what to expect with this, because it does seem like these organizers that we've talked to have made it clear they want things to remain peaceful. They've given directions to the people not to engage with counter protesters or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the one that Matt's at up in Sanford and can compare that to Minneapolis, right? Minneapolis is going to be 3 or 4 times larger than what we've seen in Sanford so far. So you want that planning prior to, Garrett, which is part of the permit process. If you come in and you're estimating that you're going to have 1,100 marchers, you pretty much know how many first responders and law enforcement you need for that. Of course, people always come in that aren't registered. I follow these folks online. They have a pretty good online presence in terms of signing up and registering. They have some outstanding rules that are publicized on their website, what they expect the protesters to do and not to do. So, at least they're trying to keep this focused on protesting and getting the voice out rather than, getting the violence and the unpeaceful, ruly people out there. So, kudos to the guys that are protesting, that are organized this, because I think they're very organized. And today it shows clearly they're working with law enforcement in unison to keep that march and protest safe. Minneapolis, we may see a whole different site out there just due to the large size. But it's a pretty much nationwide organization that's going to be registering people as you go. I've gotten 3 or 4 emails today. Make sure you get registered and read the rules. So, they're at least trying to make it safe, Garrett.
And we've got this live picture